Good day, everybody, and welcome to the off-the-cuff Fireside chat sponsored by Alchemy Cyber Defense. Today, I've got Christo again as my guest, and we're going to be discussing around this CrowdStrike fiasco that happened, but not necessarily the event, because that could have happened with any cloud vendor. But what are the lessons that we learned out of it? What is the pitfalls? Could organizations have done better? So, Christo, we've seen what happened with this software as a service provider, or not software as a service, but this application provided by CrowdStrike, and how it impacted global economies, global businesses, grounded airports, messed around with F1 teams, and so on. Everybody knows what happened, but what can we learn out of this? What is that core learning that we've got out of this whole CrowdStrike fiasco?
I think for me, the first thing that I think you hear the word Microsoft and you hear the word CrowdStrike, but we know they are big players. And I think until something happens to the big players, you kind of think that they're immune, right? There's the saying that everybody is human, and I almost want to use this in this case, that everyone is human, right? They also have their team sitting and developing their software, pushing the updates out at a rapid pace because of, our old enemy, the hacker that's sitting there that's trying to get into the organizations, right? So I think the first learning is definitely to know that it can happen with anyone, no matter if you're a big player or a small player. It's just then how do you approach it, right? And I think that these two organizations did a really good job with the communications. They got their their top level people on it, communicating to the customers, making sure that everyone's aware that's going on. And of course, the most important thing, how do you fix the problem, right? Without that, if we were sitting and wondering, hey, how am I going to get, my favorite F1 team's car going because everything is crashed, people would be quite mad. So I think that is the most important thing. So good learnings, it can happen to anyone, no matter the size. And the other learning is look at how they communicated this to the public. That's to me the second learning. Yeah.
I want to add to that. I mean, one of the things that I was looking at when I heard about this and actually started delving into what was happening is that was an update that got pushed through. And obviously, someone skipped a couple of steps in that process. The normal software development lifecycle, say you develop it, you unit test it, you do regression testing, you do a bunch of stuff. Then you take it and you do, once you've got the package ready for deployment, you start doing some socialization testing inside your own business to make sure that, you do a limited deployment check to make sure it works, deploy into a couple of other places. And when you see it works, then you go.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a acceptance that when you get pushed an update, an application update, that you are just generally accepting the fact that this is all okay. It's been tested and it's jumped through those hoops. We see from this case that wasn't what happened.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a good way of delving into the technicality of it, right? You would think that all of these organizations that's pushing updates to you, they do their own internal tests, and they do, right? As far as possible, you want to believe that they do the best job possible, but to me, each organization is so unique. The tools that they use, some of them develop their own platforms quite often. So how do you know if this certain update is going to play well with your systems, right? How do you know how it's going to affect your systems if you don't have, and this is probably the discussion of what could people have done, right, to prevent something like this, or to prevent the magnitude of this, is having the processes in place where no matter how small or big the update, you have your steps, right? You have your early adopters that you automatically update within your organization. Let's say your organization of 1,000 people, 5% of that 50 people always get the latest updates, and they will immediately be able to say, hey, something's wrong here, right? Before you push it to the rest. And then you have, of course, your QA and so forth, and you go out and stage it out to update the rest, right? And that's just talking about user machines. And of course, we know that critical servers were impacted because we had airlines being down. We had a lot of other things that was not working. So there's method to the madness with all of these updates. But then again, you think about, okay, this is one software as a service provider, one provider. And how many providers are the organizations using these days? Could it be 20? Could it be 50? So it must be such a big headache, right? Having those processes in place, but it's needed, as we've learned with this incident that's happened, right?
Yeah, it actually segues very, very well to what you guys are doing, because I think one of the biggest issues that we know in security is the fact if you can't see it, you can't defend against it. And this also talks about the causality of what happened here, because there was a process deficiency. But if I look at where this is potentially going, you've got a lot of cloud that's being consumed today, and it's being consumed very easily. So you've got this whole shadow IT thing that's running around, and the
Yeah.
potential for we can use this as a very good segue to say, but why, or not why, but this isn't limited just to applications. You can just as easily exfiltrate data, or
Yeah.
expose data.
I think it's important. The visibility aspect is a big one here, right? And one thing that the organizations will probably do now is, okay, we know we had the certain provider or vendor within our environment on our X amount of workstations and servers. And that's what we know of, right? And we can immediately say this is how many would have been impacted. But then you could find, oh, okay, here's something we didn't know about, and it's actually running a crucial part of my production environment that I didn't catalog, or that were missed somehow, right, as part of my processes. So visibility is a good thing here. If you can have visibility over everything, is it possible? You would like to think so. 100% visibility of all my assets and all my resources in my environment. We certainly do try our best as organizations, but that's a good way to then, if the thinking was it's not important, after this, you can realize, okay, this is really important to make sure
Yeah.
that you know what is within your environment, and it could be on premise, it could be cloud, it could be anywhere, right? So that's the big important part of the inventory that you need to keep.
True. On that knowing aspect, there's something that we've been doing also with regards to the agents and so on that was deployed with a specific vendor, and we started diving into my colleagues and I. We started diving into what was the use cases that was allowed, and when I look at the disclaimers and the terms and conditions of use, funnily enough, there's a lot of places where the agents aren't allowed to be used or not recommended. Aviation is one of them. Any place where it can cause physical or property damage and harm, to say you
Yeah.
don't use it there. And I think it is covered in pretty much all of the security software vendors where you can have a potential outage caused by it. Disclaimers put in there. So I think one of the things also that organizations should take a look at is whether or not the application of that control, is adequate for not just managing the cyber risk, but the operational risk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is the operational part is what's been impacted here, right? It wasn't a hack. It wasn't something that was caused by a attacker. You
Yeah.
would like to indirectly say so, because why do cybersecurity vendors and vendors update their software to make sure that we fix vulnerabilities, we enhance capabilities, right? So indirectly, yes, it's always the hacker's fault. We can say that, but um, in this case, it was something that needed an update for sure. But the operational portion of most of these businesses were affected, of course. One thing that's really interesting to me is if we talk about regulations, there's a new regulation that's coming in. I've been following it quite closely since the beginning of this year. It's called DORA. It might sound like a cartoon or something,
Dora
but
the
it's the
Explorer.
digital. Yeah, Dora the Explorer. It's the Digital Operation Resilience Act, and it's mostly EU based, right?
Okay.
But as part of that act, it says that any vendor basically that impacts their clients' computers, right, can get,
Mhm.
of course, fined and jailed and all those
Okay.
things. So it's coming into effect January of 2026, 2025. Sorry, so it's a couple of months away.
Mhm.
And I mean, this you don't want to of course let people learn the hard way, but this is a good event that has happened before that act comes in place, right? Because the figures were estimated that it could have cost the CrowdStrike in this instance around $46 billion, million dollars, sorry, for the fines. It's a 0.5 ratio of the annual turnover, right? So,
Yeah.
so if you think about it, it's a good learning before the actual regulations come in place, right? And this focuses on operational, operability of your clients. we have aviation, we have a lot of these guys that critical infrastructure, right, that needs to be running. So you don't want to punish these guys, but you want to force them in a sense that they need to have, their processes double checked, where they test and where they QA and so forth. And nothing against CrowdStrike, of course, it could have happened to anyone. So we just need to learn from this. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, look, that's an absolute fact. I mean, CrowdStrike is unfortunately now the whipping boy for what's going on, and it's always like that. I mean, the guy that messes up or the company that messes up is the one that becomes the poster child for how not to do it and or to learn from.
Yeah.
But you touched on something interesting with regards to critical infrastructure. Can you imagine this thing running off your cellular network, your communications infrastructure, and it's shut down your entire mobile network? I mean, when you look at today, everything that you do is this communications driven by mobile or by net communications infrastructure, your ability to phone a hospital, a paramedic, fire department, and so on. I mean, the impact could have been unbelievably severe. And I think it's just a blessing that it was just blue screens of death,
Yeah, no, definitely. So the fix or the turnaround, could have been a lot worse, I suppose. Although there was still some work to be done. I can't imagine the teams that were sitting, doing this work after hours. My past life, I've been there myself, and it's fun. It's fun, but you don't want to sit 3-4 days away from the family, right? But hey, we're all there.
Well, not
Critical
anymore
infrastructure.
anyway.
Not anymore. Yeah, critical infrastructure. It's really important. If you think, I think there was some of the 9/11 numbers affected within some of the countries. Australia, if I'm not mistaken, is one of them. And who knows what calls they missed, right? Could indirectly someone's life have been, threatened in that sense by not being able to get through to the operator? Probably yes, right? So there's a lot more to it, I suppose, in that sense. One thing I know we want to stay as far away from political landscapes, but this was actually something that I read about China, where they weren't affected as much because their policies were that they, were forced to, use software from cybersecurity vendors within their own country that's developed within right. So the only places within China that was affected was the hotels that's based from other countries that has operations there. But the most of China avoided everything, which is, to me, I was like, okay, these guys, okay, maybe they have some merit to their logic. So they're of course a very big country, right? So they were mostly unaffected. Very
I think they're like 1.5 billion people or something like that.
Exactly. So
they're a big chunk.
between them and India, I believe, they're the biggest chunk. So they were mostly unaffected, which is pretty interesting. I found a good learning. And then of course we have all the let's say the Linux or Linux or way people want to pronounce it, and Mac users to say, hey, again, we have one up over Windows here, right? We were not affected. Those things are, you get the memes coming up with, the people fighting, and that's always funny to see. And I suppose that also gives some merit to what you choose to run your infrastructure on, mostly, whether it's Windows or Linux or something else.
Well, look, Microsoft's been the predominant operating system since since the 80s. I mean, going back to MS-DOS, I mean, that was the first thing that everybody, back in the day used. And it is still the most prevalent operating system out there is Microsoft. Mac has only had a resurgence in the last probably about 15 odd years that it's grown. The reason why why the Linux crowd and the Mac crowd always wave this banner saying we're not getting hacked, we don't have viruses, is because I mean your hit ratio is so small. So if you're an attacker, you're going to code for the biggest percentage, your most likelihood of your highest likelihood of being successful. So
And that's true. That's 100% true. And if you think about this, Microsoft released the stats. It was less than 1% of all of the Windows machines in the world that was affected. Less than 1%, right?
Wow.
It's around 8.5 million devices. So if you think to us that, 8.5 million devices, that is absolutely crazy. but
Yeah.
it's less than 1%. So if you think about it, and to us, that's a big ratio, right? I think this is the biggest incident that's happened since the 2017 WannaCry that took out around 300,000 ish devices thereabout. So this is quite considerably more than that. And then you get some stats, right? I love these stats. I'm like 1%, 8.5 million. That is absolutely crazy how many Microsoft machines are out there, right? And for good
Yeah.
reason. They must be doing something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that if my math sucks. So that's 8.5 billion licenses or something that Microsoft has.
Yeah, exactly. So look, they're not on the poorer side of life. They make enough money. And let's hope. And I like to compare it to other industries, right? Let's look at the aviation industry. Why do we have such good or little amount of accidents? I mean, I think the chance of being in an airplane accident is like 0.001 in your lifetime percent. And it's because they've learned out of all of the previous accidents that occurred, right? Maybe
Yeah.
there was a part that was faulty or wear on this and those type of things. Human error, I mean, that's also one of them. You can see training is a big thing within the aviation industry. So let's just hope that for these vendors, small, big, doesn't really matter, that they take this as a learning and that some form of a process gets either enhanced or changed or whatever the need would be for it to occur less. I mean, we all like some excitement every now and then, but if it negatively impacts some lives, we would always want the at the end of the day that something good has come out of it, that something was fixed, right? That caused it. Yeah.
Well, actually, when you're talking about aviation security and how that works, I mean, your land side versus air side, and then you've got your plane, your avionics suite versus your recreational stuff. That's actually very interesting because from what my knowledge is, and I'm not an expert, is that they've split these systems off and they air gap them. Or if it's not physical air gapped, it's a hardware based air gap. So you're not going to get to the aviation suite, the stuff that actually keeps the plane in the air versus the stuff that you use as a passenger in the back to surf the internet, to download or to watch the movies and all of that type of stuff. But when you take that type of security and you apply it back to your organization, it is that layered approach that we've been talking about since day one.
100%.
Your Chinese walls, defense in depth, and so on, where your most important systems are gapped away from the other stuff. And that's also why we always had the thing about multi-vendor in certain spaces. So if something
100%.
happens to layer one, layer two is a different product. So you're not going to get that compromise.
I
What do you
like
think?
that.
Do
I
you think
like that
it's
approach.
time for that to come back?
Yeah, look, I think throughout the years I've heard the multi-vendor approach and the strategy, and that's a good thing to have. Typically the problem with that was seen was overhead. If you have it on one system, things start working against each other, right? Let's take, for example, in this case, if it was an agent that was running on the machine and you have a similar agent from another provider, they could clash, right? Which is a
But if you've
problem.
got Sorry, but if you've got two, let's say your server infrastructure is defended
Yeah.
by 50% is defended by product A and 50%
Yes.
is defended by product C or B.
100%. So that's where that needs to change. Then where multi-vendor strategies make a comeback or do it better this time around, where you can say, okay, let's as a minimum have my production environment running on vendor A, right? But if I switch over to DR, it can't also be vendor A, because if there was a problem, because I'm just imagining to myself, my production server falls over and that's easy. Switch over to my disaster recovery. And then it's like, okay, but that's also been updated with the same
Yeah,
problem. And then
yeah.
it crashes, right? So you're sitting with the same issue. So here's a good example, and hopefully, we'll get some case studies on this where you have vendor A on your production and you have your DR on vendor B. So if the vendor A is the cause on the side, you switch over to something that's not running the same, in this case, agent that could have potentially caused the problem, right? So that to me is things that organization can do. And let's hope we have some early adopters with that thinking
Oh, hell yeah.
to test it out, right? It goes.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about this, from a organizational risk, business continuity, business resumption point of view. and we're going back to the on-prem stuff, your data centers, usually you had, well, for high availability, specifically banking systems, you had your power that came in from two different substations. So you've got independent power coming in over and above the backup stuff. And the same thing for your telecommunications infrastructure. It came in from two different sources. So if something happened regionally, you wouldn't be impacted. And this sort of plays very well into that space, but it's also going to be very dependent on the type of business that you're in. If you are critical infrastructure, I think this is a must. You need to have that layered defense and depth and air gap stuff someplace. And that bastion host concept, or the red domain, like Microsoft called it years ago, where you've got your core infrastructure is shut down. It's there. You don't need it. You bring it up in case of a disaster.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's something that organizations should definitely start to think about again is, yes, you're saving cost in terms of reducing your overhead. You only got one screen. You only got one set of technologies. But what did it cost organizations today, not just in the outage and the recovery costs, but missed opportunities, missed income, rework costs, etc.? I think it must have been astounding figures.
Yeah, no, 100%. If we think about, let's use the providers, a lot of organizations we have a multi-cloud strategy as well. We have some infrastructure, AWS, some Google, some Microsoft. So this is a good way to say you don't need to duplicate it all over the place, right? You don't need to have everything that I have exists on the other side as well. But we're talking about core infrastructure here, right? To have my core infrastructure on all three, or at least two, so that we were talking about two different power supplies. You're not going to have two different power supplies into your data centers from the same provider, right? You're going to have it from two different providers, because otherwise it defies the point here. So you can set up yourself and protect yourself as good as possible in that sense. I'm thinking about, we're saying all of these things that people could have been doing to prevent this, right? And down the line, even with that setup, there's probably also something that can go wrong. We love the IT type of jokes that goes around, where people sitting in front of the service Christmas Eve, go, please don't, I want to have Christmas. So those type of things will always happen. But it's important to talk about it, and awareness is key, right? So people can look at it.
I think it also comes back down to understanding the risk that the organization is facing, and how do they actually respond to that risk. And one of the things I know that a lot of companies are busy with is your playbook and your desktop exercises and your scenarios. And I think this would be a very interesting scenario for the organization to say, you know what, you need to recover, let's say it's an organization of just 100 people. You need to recover 100 desktop systems, laptop systems, as well as your server infrastructure. If you're still running on-prem, you need to recover that. How quickly can you? Do you know who's your Ghostbuster team? Who are you going to call? I don't even think a lot of people know.
That's true, that's true.
Yeah. And it's important,
no,
because
I like that. I like that approach. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So there's so much that we can learn, and I think one of the things that we need to make sure and be vocal about is that people understand that this risk that we are talking about now, this event that happened, isn't going to be unique. It's happened before, and it's going to happen again. Because humans are going to fail. Even AI will fail us. Because it's created by us. But you need to make sure that you can put something in place to be able to recover from it. Getting back to that business resumption issues. It's critically important.
No, I do agree. I think the playbook and actually doing that exercise is important, right? We can talk about it. We can have it on paper. But that's why you have these drills, right? The fire departments don't go, oh, okay, I have a trainee, and the trainee's picked up a hose to put out a fire, but it's all calm, right? Everything is fine. We need to test it in a real life scenario, right? Ring that alarm. Let the alarm sounds go off. Let the environment burn as if it's really happening, and test out your robustness in that sense, right? Which is really, really cool. Yeah. The last thing that I can think of that's important here is a sad thing, I think, to me. Reading up, I don't think it's necessarily the other vendors that's doing this, right? All of them have the blog post out or the article out, like, here's how you can fix the problem, right? But some employees of these vendors went a bit too far to say, hey, if you were on our side of the fence, you're using vendor A, but we vendor B, this is how we do it, and this wouldn't have happened to you, right? And that to me is a bit sad. Kicking the injured player while they're down type of mentality.
Yeah, I know you're
And
talking about.
I just wish people would I almost want to say be a little bit more mature in this sense, and think about, we're in this together, right? This vendor that it happened with, it wasn't because they wanted something bad to happen to their customer base, right? They're
Yeah.
doing it to protect, they're updating it to protect against the bad guys, right? And
Mm.
that's what all of these vendors are in it for. So although there's competition in sales, and I want to get this client because they are, they're such an important reference client to have. At the end of the day, it's all for a common cause. We want to
Yeah.
stop the bad guys, and that to me is the better mentality to have. So I wish that these vendors, that they saw the employees said, all these bad things, that they reprimand them a little bit and say, hey guys, let's not do this. Let's rather learn from this as well. We made a mistake. We said some stuff we shouldn't have said. Let's next time around just be supportive to say, is there anything that we can help you with? Feel free to reach out if you have any concerns, because a lot of people would have just asked if they weren't using CrowdStrike, for example, to their vendors, hey, what are you guys doing? Are you making sure, please don't let this happen to me, right? That's all they wanted to know, a little bit of a surety,
Mm.
and that could have been it, right? Nothing more.
But yeah, there's also another bit to it. Can you imagine something happens with that vendor now, and they're not immune
Yeah,
to anything?
exactly.
That
Exactly. Yeah.
marketing backlash is going to be. You run around saying, "Listen, it won't happen with us," and all of a
Yeah.
sudden
No,
you've
it's
got
not
an
nice.
outage, or you got a that's it's a bad thing. But
Yeah.
like they say, karma's not something that you
Yeah.
play around with. But yeah, um,
There we go. There we go.
yeah. But I think Christy, you raise a very very good point there. When things go wrong, we're all very quick to point and say, we do it better, we do it better. But do you really? Like, can you put your money where your mouth is? And
True. True.
and instead of kicking the guy, give him a hand up. I'm not saying pay them,
Yeah.
but just
Yeah.
remember, like you said, we're all fighting the same battles. And it is nice pointing
Yeah.
and going like, "Hey, you fell on your butt," but you know,
Yeah, no, true. There were some vendors that were in a different space of things, right? That had other core functionality that could assist with actually removing and applying the patch, right? So patch management systems and so forth. So they weren't, oh, goodness, you guys were using this system. Good on you for trusting them. They were like, guys, here's a exact method of, with our tooling, you can remove that bad file and replace it with a good one, all right, and update it, and everything will be fine. And they went as far as that it works while the machines are in safe mode, that type of thing, which was awesome. I mean,
yeah.
that's to me, these oaks are really helping, because if stuff needs to be done manually, we all know it takes more time. If you can automate some of these processes, why not, right? And get the problems resolved quicker.
So I mean, I think it's a good segue or good point to close out on, is to say to part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. That's a good tagline. That's a good tagline to have. Like, hey, I'm gonna start off here. We're all gonna talk about what has happened to these guys, but I'm gonna be part of the solution, not part of the problem. You're coming in with a
Exactly.
positive note, and that's how we're ending it, guys. We part of hoping to solve some of these issues, for people that's looking at, hopefully fixing some of the processes that could have ended up causing these problems, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. And I
Awesome.
think that's it for today. Christo, thank you very, very much for your time
Pleasure.
and
Always
and
nice.
the conversation. I really enjoyed that. And
Thanks.
let's see where the next conversation is going to end up. So subscribe to the
100%.
channel, and then let's see.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Ian.
All
Lovely to
right.
chat. Chat again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. All the best.
Hey, bye.
Cheers, guys.
Hey, bye.